Hello and welcome back to the second devlog of CastCade. So I wanted to talk about spells, but one of you proposed that I have a look at PCG. And since we can all agree that my current map looked like shit, I thought it was a good idea. And oh boy, was I wrong. So what I'm gonna do is, it's not gonna be a tutorial because I don't want the video to be, 30 minutes long. So I'm gonna go a little bit in detail because I hope it will help some of you. There is very little documentation about PCG, and all the documentation I found, it's always the same thing. So it's okay, but it's not really good and not something you can use in general. So yeah, let's start it. First of all, what's PCG? PCG is procedural content generation. It's this whole new system that they've made in Unreal 5, and I think it came out officially in 5.2. It's still in progress, it's probably gonna change a lot. But it basically what it allows you to do is to create layouts at runtime or in the editor, as it depends on what you are trying to do, but it does work at runtime, which is why I'm using it and why it's so powerful. How it looks is like this, so you have a bunch of nodes, you can bring them around, and you have data, so every point, if I start, you will see how it looks. So the whole setup you've seen make this all those scatters, so all the bush, all the mushroom, the tree, the rocks, etc, etc. And basically you can go through every steps, and every steps of the way you're gonna see some data. So if I select my scatter, you can see some data. So it's basically some points you as you can see, I have 40,000 points, which is a lot of points. And you keep on manipulating this data. You can even visualize it. So here you can see the points on all the terrains and everything. And you manipulate them until you get to the point where you just spawn from those points. You can spawn the asset directly in your scene. And it happens at runtime. It can happen in the editor. So it's very powerful. But it's also very complicated because of the lack of documentation. So yeah, this is the final setup. I'll show you the process, how I got to this. But as you can see, with just a little bit of work, you can get some, I would say, pretty good result. Let's get started. So yeah, I started to sample some mesh. I don't know why, but like the mesh creates point like on the B-box basically, so it doesn't match the shape, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work even with some randomness. So what I did instead is I rayed the point on the ground. So now that the points are on the ground, I added some noise, but same thing. As you can see, the basic noise, like you don't really have option, you can't do anything, and it just doesn't work for me. So I needed to find new noise to use, and I make things easier for myself. I'll just got this noise on the library. Okay, so what I've done is I've done this PCM noise, where I call the setup fast noise. I've promoted some variables, and this way I can create my noise here. And as you can see, if I, for example, change the frequency, I can get some actual proper noise, so it will help me a lot to make more interesting scatter. Okay, so I've made some layout, as you can see. Those little beautiful box. I have the top, I have the bottom, etc. And what I've done is that I can then scatter all of those. And it's very simple. You just have to get your points and put them into a static. And one thing that is interesting is now I have rocks, right? And you have this process where you can create like weighted selector. So you can say, for example, oh, I want rocks, but I also want to have mushroom, let's say. And you can basically say how much you want of both, and you should be getting both of them. The mush are very small. The only thing is, I've noticed it doesn't happen all the time, but when you have two spawners like this, so I have two set of points which goes in the spawner, even though they spawn the same thing, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it will spawn multiple times the same yard, which is kind of useless, and I guess it does have some draw calls. So what I've done instead is you have a mode where you can select by attribute. So I've made this node, which basically do exactly the same thing, where I can set the number of weight, the asset I want, and I can also check the collision to make sure that everything spawns at the right place. So I use it for trunks, for example. And what this is gonna do is it's just gonna create the reference to the asset. And I can just merge all of them like I do here, and I can just plug this at the end into one spawner. And at least this way, I get everything inside one spawner, which is probably more efficient. And it's actually easier to work with, because instead of having to manage all of the different spawner, I can just have the proper attributes. And what I've done here too is I've splitted them based on if I want collision or not, and it's just an attribute that I'm adding before. Just an overview, I've modeled some assets with my very talented skill when it comes to asset. This is a beautiful mushroom, of course. Those are, I don't know how you call it in English. In French, it's quenouille, it's called. In Quebec. And yeah, a bunch of rocks. I just, nothing crazy about this. The only thing is I changed the color because I used it in the shader, so I can assign different, well, in the same material, I can assign different textures and stuff like this, so that's what I've done. As you can see, I model everything in Houdini because I'm just super lazy. I don't want to spend some time in Blender. The tree, I'm not really using it because it turns out it takes too much space, but I did do some little bushes. It works, looks pretty good. We have things around. Let's test on the actual map. And it's very slow. Very, very, very slow. So in theory you could say, well, it's not such a big deal because I generate the map every time, but I just don't want to have like 7 seconds of waiting every time someone does something. So I'll have to find another way. Okay, I thought about it a little bit. The issue right now is that I have to sample everything. I have to trace and ray every point on the geometry, which can be a lot of points, probably more than 50,000. So that's a lot of rays, and although Unreal is really good, it's not that good. So my plan is, each tile has its own shape, right? And the thing is, I have a way of sampling a mesh, and the way is the mesh sampler. You can tell him the tile you want to use, and if I were to debug this, as you can see, I get the points. So after that, I can add some noise or whatever, I can do some scatter, it doesn't matter. So I could take this and then find every tile that use this model and just transform the point to match the tile. Which is what you will see people doing a lot, where they just like create points on existing spawned object. But the thing is, I don't have the spawned object. So I need to get the tiles from PCG, even though I'm not spawning them in PCG, and I don't want to spawn them in PCG because I want to keep the control outside of PCG for this. And the only thing I can do with this mesh sampler is I can give it a static mesh, but I can't give multiple ones, and I've tried to give it like, because you can have multiple point data, but when I feed it 2 point data with 2 different mesh, it doesn't work. So I need to find my own way.
One eternity later.
PCG is so complicated. What I've done is I get all the mesh, all the tiles, and the thing is, for each point I can't really make a PCG point and set the mesh because it's not part of PCG point. Maybe I can make a new data, but I'm not sure. So I was like, it's fine, I'm gonna get the mesh, which I get here, and I create a new asset, and I point loop. The thing is, I have no fucking clue how you get the current loop here. I've tried everything, nothing works, nothing makes sense, it's just horrible, and I need to get the current asset, so I don't know how to make it work. So what I've done, which is super weird, is I've made the index in the seed, and now what I can do is take the seed to get the current point, which I guess is fine. It's just so weird, and maybe I could do a map and get the point and put the point in the map for the, but even that, I mean, anyway, PCG for life. At least now, if I go here, as you can see, I know exactly which mesh goes with which. So it's something. Ladies and gentlemen, behold a speed. Well, I mean, there is a little lag, but it's fine. And also I went really high on what I'm using, so I could probably reduce it, but at least now it's fine. It's good enough. It's way better. I just wanted to show you quickly something that's very powerful with this. I've done this, it's kind of like a blueprint, it's a recipe, where what I do is I get all the points that are being fed, and from those points I get the first point, and I get the static mesh that is coming in. And I can sample this mesh with the mesh sampler, and I copy back the points to every point I found, and I do some bunch of density filter. And what this gives us basically is, here I filter whatever comes in with rock B. So what this is gonna do is it's gonna find every rock B in the scene, and it's gonna create some points on the rock B. So I have some values I can feed for the angle. As an example, if I reduce this, you can see it's creating point everywhere or just on the top. And from there, I can just do my safe instancing thing, put that in, and now I have mushrooms on the rocks. And that's why it's super powerful, right? Because I can do as much as I want, really simple to control, really simple to be specific, and in the meantime, not have to care too much about how you do it. So yeah, that's cool. I wanted to show you a little how it looks. The grass is back to being particles. Oh, by the way, yeah, I've added this little grid to help me move. If you have ideas how to make it look better, go forward. So yeah, the grass is back to particles because it looked better. It was a little faster to run, and also I don't really see the point of having grass as mesh like this. Like, just the particle is, I think it's fine, and grass by itself is its own thing. So right now I wanted to test interaction a little. So yeah, I have the canoe with Nenufar, I don't know how you say that in English, that only goes around them. They don't go in the middle of water. I have a little bit of rocks. I have the trunks with some mushrooms on them. So the asset don't come like this, like it's just randomly spawned. I also have like those little bush, etc. One thing I'm doing, so about the safe test that I have in my setup, basically what I'm doing, oh yeah, I won't be able to show, but I'm doing a ray for the trunk. So if I want to put a trunk and I ask to safe test the trunk, it's gonna get like the minimum here, the maximum here. It's gonna ray down, and if it's not on the ground, it's not gonna spawn it. And it's a way for me to make sure that like I don't have a hanging trunk in the void. I do have this kind of thing. For now, I don't really bother too much about this. I can fix it later if really it start being an issue, but for now it's not a big deal. Most of them, they don't have collision. I think the big one does have collision, but that's all. So yeah, I think it looks pretty good.
Bonus!
Perfect. So I hope you liked the video. I know I didn't get into too much detail. I couldn't really. But if you have any questions, go ahead. I might do future video about this. At the end, I'm super happy with the result. I'm super happy with the system I've made. It's very powerful. It's just like the lack of documentation. It makes everything really hard. So be patient. Again, if you have questions, go ahead. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.